Okay, so the panel that we have now is on non-APC publishing models. And our first speaker is Cameron Name, who's from the Stanford University Graduate School of Education.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association for the kind invitation to speak at this conference. I'm filling in for some big shoes. John Walensky wasn't able to make it, so you have me instead. So this is a little bit about me. I wear multiple hats. I am a doctoral candidate and researcher, and I also work for a nonprofit publisher called Annual Reviews based in Palo Alto. So today I'm representing the Open Access Publishing Cooperative Study that's housed at Stanford University and also the Public Knowledge Project, and is funded through the generous support of the MacArthur Foundation. So this is a study focused on a hypothesis or a proposition around cooperatives. And to build on something that Heather Joseph mentioned earlier today, we see this as a value-driven proposition, specifically the values of collaboration and cooperation in scholarly communication to achieve coordinated and ultimately collective impact. But before we discuss that specific proposition, I'd like to set the scene to show where we are and how far we've come. The year 2014 saw a significant open access milestone passed as the proportion of research and scholarship to which there's free access passed the halfway point, and there's a couple of studies cited there, that found that roughly 25 million research articles published in English language scholarly journals between 2004 and 2014, copies of more than half are now freely available online. So researchers are increasingly making their work freely available. They're submitting manuscripts to the more than 11,000 open access journals available today, with many of their publishers who were once outspoken critics of open access. Submitting papers to subscription journals, a number of researchers are also depositing open access copies of their final drafts in repositories or on their websites. So this growth in open access has been promoted by the access policies of major funding agencies. That world map isn't really reading all that well. My apologies. But including the US government, the European Commission, United Nations, Wellcome Trust, Gates Foundation, and others, each of which insists that the research they fund be made publicly available if, after sometimes, an embargo period intended to protect journal subscriptions. But it now seems fair to say that universal open access to research and scholarship is regarded as a desirable goal among government and private funding agencies, commercial and nonprofit publishers, research libraries, and scholarly societies. So surely it's time to find a legal, scalable, and equitable means of moving beyond the halfway measures that are intended to protect a subscription market that no longer serves library nor researcher. There appears to be a readiness to redirect what is spent on journal subscriptions, upwards of $10 billion annually on a global basis, to support open access publishing models. And here's a quote from one of my colleagues in the room, from the Max Planck Institute, who did a study in their white paper published last year. Data analysis shows that there's enough money already circulating in the global market in the subscription system that could be redirected and reinvested into OA business models. But what's not clear is how to flip the subscription business models journal to open access in a financially responsible manner. Funding open access by asking authors to pay APCs has proven itself to be an effective means of financing OA by Biomed Central, PLOS, and a growing number of other publishers in the biomedical field and other well-funded realms of inquiry. But this approach has not made significant headway in advancing open access in the social sciences, humanities, and a number of the sciences. And even in areas of its strength, there are signs that it's reached its limits in pricing. Here's a quote from Outsel's Open Access Report of 2015 that funders will not fully support APCs at their current levels. The lack of uptake of funding APCs will continue if APCs charged by traditional publishers, which make up the majority of the top players, remain at their current levels. On the other hand, the rapid growth of PLOS One and other APC-based megajournals suggests that many researchers in the sciences are not entirely averse to paying such fees. So in response to this need for an alternative open access model, John Walensky, myself, and a number of colleagues are developing as well as soliciting feedback on the concept of an open access publishing cooperative in which libraries and journals collaborate in increasing access and improving scholarly publishing through both the reallocation of subscription funds and in-kind contributions. We won't take credit entirely for this idea. Raim Crow, who's here, actually wrote about OA publishing cooperatives for society publishers back in 2006, a great paper that's open access through First Monday, and suggested cooperatives as alternative model for balancing financial sustainability and mission fulfillment for society publishers. But what we're proposing is something that hasn't really been done yet, in that we don't yet have any full-blown publishing cooperatives among journals, libraries, publishing service providers, and funders. But we believe that it's part of the undercurrent of what is going on in scholarly publishing. We see it as a natural extension of the collaborative spirit that's demonstrated by the many research libraries that host faculty as well as student open access journals represented by the Library Publishing Coalition, a U.S. federation of research libraries that were involved in supporting over 400 journals and 773 books in association with 30 university presses. How far this cooperation among libraries can go has been demonstrated by Scope 3 in high energy physics. We like to think that because they were high energy, they were first. What they've achieved is to arrange for 3,000 libraries and institutes as well as funding agencies, institutions from 44 countries to cooperate in flipping high energy physics journals to open access. There's much to be learned from Scope 3 and its combination of APCs and collaboration, its work with commercial and nonprofit publishers, and the global applicability of its benefits. So there are other approaches emerging in disciplines that are not well served by the predominant APC model, particularly due to the paucity of research funding. In the humanities, there are programs like the Open Library of the Humanities. I won't talk about it because my colleague on the panel will. But another approach, the Knowledge Unlatched initiative, has been able to solicit support from around 300 libraries in its first phase and is now underwriting the cost of publishing around 100 open access monographs. The Public Knowledge Project itself is a project of Simon Fraser University and has been working for about 17 or 18 years in developing open source software, in particular the Open Journal System, OJS, which now hosts about 10,000 journals worldwide on the cooperative principle of open source. So anyone can contribute to it, download it, and use it for journal management, review, editorial, and publication. So we believe that libraries cooperating in scholarly publishing is part of this changing landscape. Libraries are investing in and gaining expertise in scholarly publishing and increasingly partnering with organizations rather than purchasing services or subscribing to content. So now that we've established that cooperation between libraries and journals is nothing new and that it's part of an undercurrent in scholarly publishing, part of the ecology, what we're talking about now is cooperatives as the next step in terms of organization. So this isn't an us versus them, this is an us all working together. So the cooperative will take things a couple of steps further by forming a formal association, a legal body between journals and publishers, libraries, and potentially partnering or contracting with third-party services, and also including funding agencies. So what we're talking about is truly multi-stakeholder cooperatives. Building on the premise that there are already sufficient financial resources in the system, the cooperatives will operate with existing allocations from libraries, operating on existing expenses from journals, as if it were maintaining the same economy. We want to pool resources. We believe librarians have much to offer to publishing in terms of systems, software development, training, data analysis, and distribution and uptake of content. And we believe they can be excellent partners in scholarly publishing. We hope that they would be given a credit for the in-kind contribution that they make in hosting and providing services, and that would become part of the cooperative economy. Finally, in terms of transparency and metrics, one of the great frustrations of doing studies and trying to do some kind of financial modeling in scholarly publishing are the non-disclosure agreements that we frequently run into. I have rumors on a bunch of figures that I can't ever use in research because they were given to me over one too many a drink at a pre-conference reception. But the idea that we have non-disclosure in this economy that's based on the sharing of knowledge seems wrong-headed, frustrating as a researcher, and not so well aligned with the notion of knowledge as a public good. So finally, the cooperative and its commitment to improving the quality of scholarly publishing and transparency will include and adopt international standards. So while the detailed workings of any cooperative association are to be democratically determined by its membership, the basic structure of the cooperatives we are proposing is based on a number of assumptions. The first is that publishers and editors of subscription journals have achieved a level of quality and professionalism in publishing that's based on their current revenue level, which, if never entirely adequate, needs to be at least matched in a move to open access. And the corollary is that research libraries have worked out an expenditure level for journal subscriptions that, while always under downward pressure, provides the best current indicator of their ability to support the quality of scholarly publishing for any given title to which they subscribe. And the next assumption is that the formation of a cooperative requires an initial commitment of trust and financial sustainability, affording its members a period in which to work out the allocation of resources for sustaining open access. So we are exploring a strategy for a subscription equivalent transition, which is a period that provides a stable opportunity in which to develop cooperatives and implement this significant change in the financing of scholarly publishing. So the SET, as we're calling it, is a way to ensure that libraries will commit to paying a subscription equivalent fee as a transition to avoid the free rider issue for at least a set period, which we're proposing is 3 years. On sufficient agreement, once a certain threshold of institutions has been met, sufficient funds are assured for publishers provided that they flip their content to open access. The situation is reversible. It costs the libraries no more money, is no more financial risk to publishers, and in 3 years, if the cooperative cannot agree on a sustainable path forward, the exit strategy is for journals and libraries to fall back on the original subscription model. So the model allows for trust and commitment, a buffer period in which to set up the cooperative, allows for membership to grow, libraries and journals to agree on standards and quality control, and a commitment that is still very much based on innovation, building a reserve, and improving the quality of scholarly publishing. These are a few slides that relate to different periods of the set. So pre-set, in planning, organizers will draw up an initial economic model for the set and post-set periods based on available subscription rates and numbers, calculating threshold numbers for libraries and journals to join the co-op. An expression of interest will propose initial terms for cooperative governance, management and committees. Subscription journals will go open access, receiving subscription revenue equivalent from libraries, while open access journals will sustain their current funding mechanisms if they're joining the cooperative. In order to recruit institutions, the expression of interest will be circulated among journals and other libraries with signatories agreeing to found a co-op if the numbers warrant it. And for publishers, the journals, once they reach agreement with the current publisher on terms for joining the co-op, can retain their current platform or switch to a common co-op platform. I'm going to have my little Marco Rubio moment, excuse me. Thank you. Hopefully not as awkward as that one, or sweaty. Okay, so during the set, the cooperative is initiated with an executive director hired, a governing board and committee structure put in place, members set standards for publishing, journals begin to share data on publishing expenses, revenue sources, usage, and an initial economic model. If there's sufficient journal interest, the specifications will be developed for a common post-set co-op platform, which will be subject to vendor bids. So for the first time, we can have an actual open market for publishing services. And post-set, as I said, if there is sufficient agreement, we can move ahead with the cooperative. If not, journals can move back to the subscription model. They can also seek to join or form a federation of publishing cooperatives to extend sharing and value. We are proposing a common article allocation with provisions for extra features and other standards accompanied by transparency and metrics, finances and governance, and a focus always on improving quality for authors and readers. So I just want to very quickly run by some results. We ran this idea as part of our research by libraries, as would need their commitment in order to make a model like this possible. We surveyed 256 librarians from 220 institutions in 29 countries. I'm running a little bit out of time, so I'm going to move a little fast. But predominantly in the US and Canada, due to our slightly wonky survey approach. The blues represent agreement. Essentially, librarians, for the most part, saw quite a lot of promise with this approach. There were some concerns, factors that worked against the strategy. Librarians said that their budgets needed relief, and promising to pay equal or like amounts in co-op fees didn't offer relief. There was the concern of free ridership. Even if we don't contribute, others will, and the journal will go open access. Why don't we wait and see? Concerns around systemic inertia. Libraries said that they were generally risk averse and change is seen as risk. There are also concerns around incentives. More concerns around sustainability. What will happen when the 3 years are up? The model is new, so there are no standard approaches for creating contracts and agreements between journals and libraries. And many journals lack the autonomy to move to this kind of model. Finally, one of the biggest concerns that we saw was a concern around governance. And this point from a librarian, as a library, we could be involved in multiple SEC co-ops, each organized around one or more journals. This sounds like an administrative and political nightmare. But with good librarian humor, this librarian said, but hey, perhaps I can get EBSCO to manage all my set co-op obligations. Overall, we saw very strong agreement with this approach among the library community. We started now to survey publishers. Initial results are they do not agree with this approach as much, unsurprisingly. But we will be doing some stakeholder consultations and sitting down and having some more detailed discussion and doing market research. We also have a couple of case studies ongoing, and I'm going to invite you to weigh in on the case studies that we've got online on Google Docs. We're inviting everyone to comment. We have a case study with Libraria, which is an anthropology-based collective with 9 journals, 6 that are subscription, and 3 that are open access, moving hopefully towards a cooperative, and also journals in Canada. We ask people to contribute data and also participate in consultations. If there are any questions, you can find me here at the conference or at my email, and that's all. Thank you.
So we'll take questions at the end of the panel. Our next speaker is Caroline Edwards from the Open Library of the Humanities.
Great. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me at the back? Okay. Yeah, sure. So thank you for the invitation to come and speak on this panel. I'm very excited, particularly to be following such an excellent keynote that we had a moment ago from Mackenzie Smith. I'd particularly like to pick up on some of the points she was making about authors having their own market power. And also, of course, Cameron, I think you euphemistically referred to it as systemic inertia, which I'm going to take to mean, in part, the inertia on academics themselves. A little, I know there are various layers to this complicated question. So if I just tell you a little bit by way of introduction who I am and why I think I might be here. I'm part of the Open Library of Humanities. So this is a scholar-led charitable organisation set up with my colleague Martin Eve. We set it up as an organisation, a kind of community organisation 3 years ago, and then we launched it 12 months ago. So we're just celebrating our birthday month now. The main idea behind this then was that APCs are not sustainable in the humanities disciplines. Having worked in various different university departments where research budgets are incredibly small and library budgets are of course stretched, it was very clear to Martin and myself that this was never going to work for the kinds of disciplines that we worked in. So we decided that we wanted to do something about it, and I think one of my overriding experiences of doing open access advocacy work over the last 3 years has perhaps been the frustration a little bit that academics are often absent from these kinds of conversations, and those of us in the room who are researchers and are tenured academics have sort of found our way here because we've got into publishing. But really, it seems to me that there's a huge disconnect between the libraries and the publishers on the one side, or sometimes at loggerheads, and the academic researchers themselves. So what we've decided to do is to try and make it our mission, if you like, to get academic researchers in humanities disciplines who have been traditionally fairly resistant to open access for lots of different reasons, to not only engage with this question, but actually see that there's something positive and exciting, and this can be a fantastic opportunity for them. We became a charity under UK law because we were absolutely determined that no one could ever co-opt us and that we have non-profit motives. So we have a charitable mission. Our mission is actually quite broad. It really is just to do anything that our trustees see fit in order to support open access publishing and scholarship and education. And actually this, I'd like to sort of suggest that this slight looseness around what the Open Libraries is and what it does, it's evolved a little bit for any of you who might know about us since January 2013 when we first launched a kind of call for interest. That actually this looseness and this sense of evolving over time has been one of the best things about the project. It's meant that we've been able to respond very deftly and very nimbly to feedback from librarians, from programmers, from academics themselves, and from publishers who want to work with us. And it's meant that we've managed to kind of shift in a way that we see as being most effective. The statistics are changing all of the time, and no doubt the things I'll tell you are already out of date. But currently we have 18 journals on our platform. That's within 12 months, we now have 18 journals. They cover a huge range of disciplines, everything from architectural history to classics and theology to literature, modern languages. We have a bunch of linguistics journals and so on, media studies, film studies, TV, and that kind of thing. We also have our own mega journal. Perhaps this is the more experimental aspect of the OLH, and this was the originary idea, which was, why is there not a +1 for the humanities? And various different people were involved in conversations a few years ago about why has this not happened? How could we do something to set up a kind of mega journal for the humanities? And so that is indeed what we actually did. That was our starting point. The Open Library of Humanities journal is the mega journal. What that means is that it's a multidisciplinary journal run across all of the humanities and verging into some of the social sciences disciplines. I'm in charge of overseeing that one, so it's been quite an interesting experience, I can tell you, running that for the first year. Currently, we have an editorial network of just over 55 editors who I have recruited to our editorial board. They work in sections, so they work in disciplinary sections. These are all tenured academics with experience, and we oversee and manage their role. And actually, I may have time to come back to this a bit later on in the talk, but we do publish in any language, although thus far it has pretty much been English submissions and a couple of Italian submissions. Right now I'm working with a German team, so we're getting a German editorial team together. We've been working on the programming side and the platform is ready to take German submissions. We haven't yet launched the German-facing side. We're going to do that in the next couple of months. And we're also putting together a French editorial team. So we have ambitions to publish in languages other than English. We'd really like to try and challenge the dominance of Anglophone scholarship in the humanities sphere. This is already out of date, actually, as of this morning. We're published now by 200 library partners worldwide, as well as an international network of scholars, scholarly associations, librarians, programmers, and like-minded publishers. So what I'm really here to talk about today then is this idea of the new funding model, specifically relevant, I think, to this panel. We decided to call it the Library Partnership Subsidy. I'm sorry, it's a 3-letter acronym, or TLA, so we refer to it as the LPS. What it really means is that we can't use the term subscription because no one is subscribing to any of this content. It is openly available to anybody with an internet connection. But rather, we wanted to think about how can we have libraries joining a partnership where we have our own charitable governance structure and the library boards have their own governance stake actually in the running of the OLH. And how can we work together in this difficult and interesting transition of flipping journals and moving towards open access? So, the basic idea, hopefully represented by this diagram, is fairly simple. The idea is that we have a large number of libraries from research institutions and colleges around the world contributing a comparatively small amount of their budgets to help sort of provide the immediate funds for the production costs of all of our publishing and also to build up a fund so that we have sustainability into the future. Now, this amount, currently it averages out at between $800 and $1,000. For those much larger research-intensive universities, we've had feedback that this is a very small amount, and they could be, and indeed are, willing to pay much more in the future. For the smaller liberal arts colleges and smaller universities, obviously money is tight, but nevertheless, they feel that this is something worth supporting. So many different libraries, what they do then is they pay into a cost pool, and out of that cost pool, we pay for all of the costs of production. Now, for the first 3 years of running the Open Library of Humanities, we are funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. We're currently on our second grant, and so this is a 3-year grant after initial seed funding phase. And that has specific requirements that we have to meet, and all of those targets actually we're exceeding to our delight and surprise. And those involve tech and computer programming work, as well as building editorial and also building the number of members that we have on our LPS. So on the academic side then, the reason that we feel it's so vital not to use article processing charges is of course because of a kind of democratic commitment, if you like, to academics working at institutions, perhaps independent scholars, graduate students and so on, who really don't have recourse to APCs. They can't put them in their grant proposals in the same way that our STEM colleagues can. And then of course on the library side, we feel that that subscriptions actually help libraries in some senses to budget, and that APCs can be quite an unfair model. It can be quite hard for libraries to kind of build those in from year to year. They're not sure how much it's going to be costing them. So we want to offer an alternative in this LPS scheme. We found so far that this is very cost effective. We have, I don't know if I actually have a slide. Sorry, I don't have a slide to show you this. But at the moment, we're basing our production costs on a model of $500 per article. But I say that with a caveat, which is that we're working very hard with our tech team to build certain components of our project, which are all open sourced and will therefore reduce the cost of professional publishing services for open access for ourselves at the OLH with all of our journals, and also for any other publisher who wishes to share our open source software. So one example of this is a typesetter, which my colleague Martin has been developing with his team. This would mean that we can automate the typesetting process, which will bring down the number of hours of human labor required to typeset articles, and would mean that we don't have to pay to a third-party company in order to cover our typesetting costs. And there are other examples of work that we have longer term to develop our platform, which also make it much more cost effective. So we've really kind of used the fact that the Open Library of Humanities is a new project. We're a born digital publisher. We can be very nimble. We don't have the kind of overheads that these larger scholarly presses even and legacy publishers certainly have. We don't need to make any profits. So it's been possible for us to run things extremely cheaply and extremely efficiently. What is it that our journals receive? They receive a number of things, which hopefully I can come on to describe to you. Just to go back 1 year then, so this was September 2015, and this was when we launched. We were delighted to receive quite a lot of media attention. I should say my experience with the OLH has been that because since its inception, we saw ourselves as a community-grounded project, bringing together academics, librarians, publishers, and tech people, programmers, and so on. And that meant that a large number of people became absorbed in this kind of public conversation. We set up a committee structure, so we have various different committees who oversee developments on the platform and on the project indeed. And so this allowed us to receive quite a lot of media attention, which I really think was helpful, particularly because as anyone who's setting up a new open access publishing project will no doubt know, that actually establishing your reputation is difficult in a complex and rapidly evolving publishing ecosystem. So I mentioned then we went from the initial idea of a mega journal into this idea of a multi-journal platform. So this supports open access publishers, and we host pre-existing journals. So what we've been doing is inviting applications from journals to migrate onto our platform. And there's a particular strategic reason for doing this, which is that whilst we can build all of the exciting, innovative technology that we like, actually changing scholarly behavior is incredibly hard and slow work. As has been mentioned a couple of times today, we're still living in a publishing world where we have 17th century kind of print models and ways of thinking about how we should distribute our research. And so academia moves at a kind of glacial pace sometimes. And so we quickly realized if we can't necessarily change academics' behavior, if that systemic inertia means that scholars won't take a chance perhaps on an open access publisher they don't know very well, and they would prefer to stick with their sort of top-ranking journal because of, quite necessary reasons like tenure and promotion and so on. If we can't change the individual's behavior, then why don't we just kind of direct our focus on targeting the editorial committees? And so that really is what we've been doing. We've been going to editorial boards and persuading them en masse to kind of apply to move onto our platform. It became very competitive. Actually, this year, we had a 2/3 rejection rate for all of the journals who applied to move onto the OLH, which is a very difficult position to be in. We don't really want to be rejecting fantastic journals, journals that represent scholarly societies, journals that we would dearly love to publish, but because of our rate of growth, we can't right now afford to publish. So it actually became incredibly competitive, and we weren't able to accept very many of the journals who applied to us. We have now, as of January 2017, we've changed our strategy, particularly because we want to focus on this idea of flipping, I'll come back to that. I think I had something on flipping. Yeah, flipping subscription journals. We're not actually going to be accepting any new journal applications for pre-existing open access journals. Rather, we're going to target journals which are already subscription. The very simple reason for this, of course, is that our library partners, I think, have given us a kind of period of grace. They're happy to invest in the library partnership subsidy. They're happy to help us try and shift towards open access. But in 3, 4, 5 years' time, they may not still be happy if they don't see results. And so what we're doing is we are already flipping journals, and we'll continue to do so. And then we can show them year by year, this is how much we are saving for you. So here on the slide, to illustrate this point, is perhaps the most high-profile example of a journal that we've helped to flip to date. This is, of course, the journal Lingua, which was published by Elsevier last autumn after some protracted and tense negotiations with the publisher. The editorial board quit en masse. They entirely left the journal. They weren't allowed to take the journal name with them, which raises some very interesting questions about who owns the property of a journal which predated Elsevier by some decades, and apparently it wasn't the editorial network. So what they did was they set up the new journal. They called it Glossa. It has a similar linguistic meaning. They moved onto the Ubiquity site. Ubiquity is our kind of customers, our services provider, sorry. And the OLH is going to be underwriting all of the production costs going forward of Lingua. This received a huge amount of attention. It was covered by all kinds of publications, Le Monde, Nature, Higher Education, The Chronicle, Wired magazine, all sorts of places, the FT, in fact. And Commissioner Murdash at the European Union also cited Lingua as an example of the way in which he felt that publishing should be moving forwards into the future, which actually I think gives you some sense of how symbolically important it is to just start setting up these kinds of open access publishing projects and to prove to politicians, our own colleagues and academics, and to those publishers perhaps who haven't modified their behaviour, that this is possible and we can do it without them if necessary. So we're working closely with what's called the Fair Open Access Network. This is the network that's set up by the linguistic group of Dutch linguists at Glossa. We're also working with various kinds of grant proposals at this stage. There's lots of exciting possible future sources of revenue, including spreading out beyond the humanities and setting up other disciplinary journal platforms within the Open Library of Maths, for example, the Open Library of Engineering. So there's an enormous amount of appetite and interest in this kind of model, and we're dealing with a lot of different people to try and negotiate how we might go moving forwards. Okay, if I just finish up, I think, just to say a bit more about our library network. As I said, that's already out of date. So it's 200 libraries. The majority of these libraries are actually based in the United States. We also have a number in Canada, right the way across the UK and Europe, Belgium, Holland, Sweden, Finland, Austria, a couple in New Zealand and Australia. We also receive block grant support from the Galileo Consortium, which is made up of various different colleges and libraries in the state of Georgia in America, the Riksbankens Jubileumsfond in Sweden, and the Austrian Science Fund. So I think it's been incredibly heartening to see how certain funders particularly are very keen to be working with projects like the OLH as well as various other projects to try and help shape the kind of publishing open access future that they would like to see. Just a little bit about rolling out then. We have a target of 300 libraries by the end of next year. I think we're looking pretty well set to achieve that. We might even achieve that a little bit sooner. We'll be rolling out multilingual versions of the Open Library of Humanities site. And we're building strong links, particularly with scholarly societies, with editorial boards, with library consortia where possible, consortia like Lyrasis in the United States, like the JISC group in the UK, and various others that we've been dealing with. And so really my parting gesture, I guess, is if you're interested in any of this, please do feel free to come and talk to myself, or please do come and get in touch with us. I think we're starting to see, as was mentioned a little bit earlier today, that there is a complexity and an excitement around all of the different open access projects that there's a kind of renaissance, as it's been described, taking place at the moment. There are some very exciting initiatives coming through, and the idea of more cooperative and structured coordination between non-profits like ourselves is one that is very exciting to me. So thank you very much for your attention.
So our final speaker for this panel is Ariana Becerril from Redelec, and she'll be speaking about the open access model in Latin America. If the slides work.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon. First of all, I really want to thank you very much to the organizers, Claire, Leila, all the support for giving me the opportunity to be here today. And to share this, how we are doing open access in Latin America, particularly in a tradition of non-APC publishing. So maybe you're going to hear a different point of view, a different way of supporting open access, and it is really important not only for us, I mean, Redalic, the organization that I'm representing today, but for all the efforts that have been made in Latin America related to open access. So thank you very much for that. And I should start by saying that Latin America is not in transition to open access. And this fact really changes all of this conception of open access in Latin America. Open access is a native concept in the publishing tradition in Latin America. Science generated in Latin America has been open access, mainly government funded. Not all of the science generated in Latin America is government funded, but the most prestigious journals and the most prestigious research is funded by public grants. So both research and dissemination of research results are supported by public economical resources. The challenge what has been facing all over these years is the access to science that is produced, that is generated in other regions of the world. This has been an issue in Latin America. Our publishing is not outsourced to commercial publishers. That is something, another key fact that is important to highlight. Our publishing is not outsourced to commercial publishers. They are published mainly by public institutions, universities, and public agencies. And open access publishing, as I said before, is not in a concept of charging authors. This is a really new concept, and some of our journals are starting to adopt this new concept as an innovative model, but it is not a concept that was, in fact, in Latin America. So let's talk about a little bit the ecosystem in Latin America. Well, if we can see the scientific communication system as a pyramid structure here, we can see in the basement the set of journal publishing that is mainly founded, as I said before, by public institutions, by governments. After or above this, as a second layer, let's say, we have public-funded institutional journal portals or repositories that are providing added value services to the users and to the editors. And above this, as a third layer, let's say, we have platforms of visibility, like Redalic, like Cielo. Here we have also the founder of Cielo, Abel Packer. La Referencia, Claxo, Latindex, all efforts in open access that have been built above over these efforts to give visibility to publications, to help in the electronic edition of journals specifically, to assure quality, or at least to select the best journals to be published, and providing metrics. That is also an interesting thing that these platforms in this third layer of the scientific communication system is providing. Some key factors of success in Latin America to build this public-funded scientific communication system are cooperation, are networking, is crowdsourcing. It is software that is either open source, free, or many times in-house developed. That is the case, for example, of Redalic, that all the software that we are using is in-house developed in combination with open source software, and international collaboration. All the stakeholders like editors, reviewers, authors, designers, the editorial teams are supported by or the majority of them are supported by public institutions. So if we see this machine of open access in Latin America, we can For example, mention just a few efforts, and I have these numbers, maybe for you to check later. I don't have enough time to go deeply. But let's say that we have a big stakeholder supporting open access and are mainly driven by governments, by public grants. For example, the case of Reda Leak, as I am part of the founders of this system, Reda Leak, for example, is a scientific information system that is seen as a repository, first of all, because we hold a collection of full-text articles. Today we have a collection of almost 500,000 full-text articles in our platform. We index more than 1,000 journals that are previously evaluated to be indexed in the platform, so we can guarantee that they have quality, they are scientific, they are peer-reviewed journals, published by more than 500 public institutions, well, mainly public institutions from 22 countries. And all these journals have published contributions from more than 1 million authors all over the world. So this is important to say that our journals are also contributing to the publication of results of many other regions in the world. All those authors come from 10,000 institutions from more than 150 countries all over the world, and we are registering about 80 million downloads per month. So this is to give an example of how a system is contributing in the open access environment in Latin America. This is, for example, related to green open access. The green open access is another key interesting part of this ecosystem in Latin America and is composed by institutional repositories. We have in the region more than 300 repositories. We have national networks that are all collected and integrated by a bigger project that is called La Referencia, that is a Latin American network that holds or integrates 8 national networks and indexes more than 1 million documents, La Referencia. We have also disciplinary repositories that are all open access, obviously, like CLACSO, for example, that is focused on social sciences. Some of them are related to environmental health, agriculture, health. We have also mandates. Many of them are institutional mandates, 41 institutional mandates. 3 national legislation related to open access. The case of Peru, Argentina, and Mexico are national legislation. And in this system, we have obviously strengths and weaknesses. And I borrowed these ideas from Dominique Babini. Some of these strengths are, for example, the tradition of cooperative information system. This is something that is native in Latin America, a scientific communication system. A scholarly-led open access initiative, mainly or primarily government-funded open access, the national legislation, as I said before, but however, we have some weaknesses. For example, our institutional and either the national mandates are more recommendations other than mandates. They are not mandatory, so this is something weak. We have based our system of research evaluation. I mean, the researchers' evaluation and the journal evaluation is more based in the commercial system, more based on, for example, impact factor. So the metrics that are being developed by these platforms are not considered by the national evaluation systems or institutional evaluation system, either for authors or for journals. That is something really, weak in Latin America. And also, we have now this new concept of APC that is kind of inserting a new different or new models in our region. So, and there's another let's say, another weakness that is we have no regional open access formal coalition. among these key stakeholders in Latin America. So we wonder, how could Latin America and other developing regions participate in the global scientific conversation when restrictions change from reading to publishing? So in the past, the restrictions were was about accessing to the knowledge, but now the restrictions will be to publish. So how in Latin America and how in other developing regions could participate in this global scientific conversation if we have now restrictions in terms of publishing? Just to say another ideas about this, a few number of journals still work on their hybrid model in Latin America. For example, subscription for readers in printed versions and open access online. Practically, no journal charges pre or post acceptance fees. In the case of Redalyc, for example, about 92% of the total journals indexed by Redalyc are non-APC journals. And I have to say that these remaining 8% are journals that have started with this new model of APC since 2 years ago. So it is a kindly of new model in Latin America. Subscription journals haven't been self-sufficient or sustainable ever in Latin America just for the subscription charges. And this is something really interesting that is happening right now in Latin America. And it is more related to the innovative technologies that can lower costs for journals in Latin America. And we really believe that this is the way Latin America can survive these new challenges. Redalyc recently launched a software called Marcalyc for XML tagging. This is a really new tool that is freely accessible for journals that are indexed by Redalyc. We are working under the JATS Journal Article Tag Suite, as you know, JATS, specifically under the JATS for Reuse recommendation, to generate not only the XML files for every journal, but also the media-enriched article reader. I mean, we are generating mobile and responsive readers for the user in order to enable journal editors to add media to the articles. I mean, video, audio, and any other interactive images inside the articles. So we have now providing this tool as a free service for the journals that are indexed in Redalyc. We are also generating the PDF versions, the EPUB versions, and HTML files for all these journals that are starting to use this new tool. And we, as a position in Redalyc, we provide this free access tool for non-open access journals. So, because Redalyc have been investing in developing this tool, it took us like more than a year, 20 people developing this tool, and this is kind of a subsidy for the journals that we index. So we provide free access for journals that doesn't charge authors. Because we really believe we are lowering costs for electronic journal editions. In the market in Latin America, it costs about $400 for XML tagging of one issue for a journal. So Redalyc holds more than 4,000 issues. We can do the math and we can imagine which is the impact of this new tool for XML markup. Just a few days after Marcalyc was launched, we received user account requests from more than 200 journal editors, and this number is obviously increasing. And this is a particular case, the case of the Journal of the Entomological Society of Argentina that eliminated its APC policy to apply for a user account. This is the evidence of that situation that happens just last week. because the editor argument that, or say that the APC didn't represent a huge input for the journal, so he preferred to eliminate its APC policy in order to use this XML tagging tool, because it is, in terms of inversion, it represents a bigger benefit for the journal. So I just let some final remarks on the table. In a government-funded scientific communication system where non-APC publication is a fact and sustainability is driven by public resources, which are the advantages in adopting a model to charge author fees? Wouldn't APC be a risk of discouragement governments and public institutions to keep supporting scientific research and publications? Wouldn't APC be a risk of discouragement of non-profit open access platforms like Redalyc, the one I represent, to keep strengthening publications? Could journals in Latin America really become self-sustainable through APCs in a region with no funds in research projects to publish results? That is a reality and another important fact. We don't have grants to publish in the planification of research projects in Latin America, at least not currently. Could institutions, researchers, funders afford publication costs? So we really believe the APC model brings a risk of widening the gap between Latin American research and international publication. We are in risk of exclude authors that cannot afford APCs and could be will be excluding authors from this scientific or global scientific conversation, as well as a risk of breaking the open nature of scientific communication system in Latin America, causing a distortion that, I don't know, maybe with unpredictable results. So I just let some of these ideas on the table. So thank you very much.
Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes for questions for the panel.
Hi, I'm John Dove. I just wanted to just share with you a perception which I think you all agree with, which is in the humanities that APCs don't work. And I'll just give you the case of my son who teaches at the Machiavel University in Banska Bystrica, Slovakia. He fell in love and we've lost him, but he comes and visits still. His colleagues, you know, Slovakia is not the global south. It's a developed country. It's you know, in the Eurozone. But a PhD professor at his university makes 1,000 euros a month. If they have an APC of $2,500 euros, it's just not feasible. And their humanities department, which is where he teaches in translation studies, they don't even have the money for JSTOR. So a lot of things, this really is an under-resourced situation, and I think that that's very much true in the humanities. So I completely agree with that conclusion that you had.
Hi, Caroline. I'm really encouraged by the Open Library of the Humanities. I think it's actually a co-op in action already. Two things. Can you talk about how the library subsidy is calculated? And can you talk about governance, particularly how libraries as supporting members, how they would participate in governance, particularly because you're a UK charity?
Yep, sure. So the LPS was calculated in consultation with some of our advisory board, who themselves are librarians. It's interesting to receive feedback. I can't give you, we haven't polled people, we haven't got an official study, but anecdotal feedback suggests some colleges are quite happy with a small amount and other colleges think this isn't enough money and we should be asking for more. So we'll have to see how that develops. To address the question about the governance structure, the way it's set up is that everybody who joins the LPS at the banded rate gets membership on the library board. And the library board entitles them to collective decision-making about anything which affects how much money they are putting in to our production pool, cost pool through the LPS. So at the moment, that's really only as we expand. So we're taking on more journals each year. This year, obviously, we've expanded to 18 journals when we only launched with 7, I think. So we've expanded quite a lot, and we have expansion plans phased for the next few years. So really what we do is when we have our applications round and we have our OLH directorial recommendations to make, we put that to a vote. It's done electronically. Every single LPS member, the librarian, the individual who is our point of contact gets to do that vote. And then once we've received all of that, we can make a decision and we can share the voting data statistics with them. So currently they are basically voting to say, yes, we're happy to accept these 5 new journals at the price you've suggested for the foreseeable future, ongoing. So that's how it works. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Meredith Moravati with Dryad, and I actually also had a question, a follow-up to Open Library of Humanities. You talked a little bit about your growth rates and having to turn away a large chunk of new journals coming onto your platform. And I was wondering if you were considering sort of ways to strategize, you know, how you'll grow in the future in terms of what journals you'll bring in and how to improve your community, or if you're looking more at costs and, you know, focusing on managing the quick growth that you've had over the year, or sort of what are the challenges there, or something that I thought would be really interesting to expand on.
Yeah, no, that is a really good question, actually. Okay, so strategies in terms of, the decision that we've taken from 2017 to not accept pre-existing open access journals is not by any means a permanent decision. I think longer term, I think that everyone involved in the OLH would really like to see it being an organisation that can help sustain vulnerable, volunteer, kind of labour-led, open access journals. So I would like to see us being able to give them a permanent home and take care of all of the kind of production costs for them. In the shorter term, however, as I mentioned, we need to focus on these offsetting questions and reducing subscription costs. So there are a number of different kind of strategic reasons that we would suggest or recommend to the Library Board that some journals get accepted over others. All of the journal applications we receive are put out to they're put out to double external review from experts in that specific field. So we get really detailed reports on the value of the journal to the scholarly community internationally, the experience of its editorial and advisory board, the quality of its publishing to date, its rejection and acceptance rates. All of this information is fed back in. There are some things that we would like to promote. So we've been quite keen, for example, to take on scholarly society journals because we think that's really an important route to supporting scholarly associations. Another one is, I forgot to mention a whole bunch of things in my talk, at the spur of the moment. We've just signed up an agreement with the University of Wales Press, which is an open access university press, to do a co-publishing partnership, and we hope that this is the first of many such co-publishing agreements. What it means is that we get to set the production cost that we are prepared to pay per article. We process that internally like an APC, but it's all paid internally, if that makes sense. And because the University of Wales Press is a not-for-profit publisher, their charitable mission and our charitable mission work really well hand in hand, so it's a perfect kind of relationship. So that would be another reason why we might choose some journal applicants over others, because there are particular university press or scholarly publishers that we would wish to work with and support. And perhaps the third strategic reason that might be worth mentioning is the question of multilingual publishing. So journals which already publish in French, in English, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in whatever. Those kinds of applications we're particularly keen, so long as the quality meets the kind of threshold criteria that is assessed by our external reviewers.
So I've got a question for Arianna. It seems a great shame that, one of the threats to what you're doing in a sense is this business of sort of evaluation via the, the so-called international journals or high-impact journals or whatever, and that somehow, undermining a little bit what the incredible work that you've done. So given all the dots that have been joined, the government funding the infrastructure that you need to create this system, it seems odd that then the evaluation dots aren't being joined as well. But so that was what, and then if I could just ask one for Cameron as well. I'm curious about the next steps. You said some of the conversations so far with the publishers, and clearly it's early days. But I wondered how many do you need to express an interest in order to do an experiment, as part of the scheme that you're investigating?
Well, thank you, Mark. Yeah, in fact, it's kind of threatening this new model of APC in Latin America. So in our case, the position of Red Lake is really strong about this model. So we are going to continue indexing every journal that approves the quality criteria. But next year, we are now incorporating a new criteria in which a journal has to, maybe we are going to penalize an APC journal, and it could affect if we continue indexing this journal, if they implement this new model. So we are responding to these new concepts in order to keep the system, or to keep encouraging or motivating governments to keep supporting journal publishing. And we really believe that some strategies that could help in this, or in avoiding the exclusion of authors, definitely is technology. So we have to empower editors, we have to empower authors to participate in a crowdsourcing system in order to have the possibility to continue participating in this global conversation of science. So we will be keeping and developing new tools related to, for example, author tagging of articles and other technology.
Mark, so I was actually going to initially present on our anthropology case study, but just 2 days ago, we got some new information and the numbers all changed, and so I didn't really feel comfortable talking about it. But it's kind of been an ongoing challenge, and as I mentioned, because of the non-disclosure agreements of publishers, it's been really difficult to find what actual subscription costs are. But if you have a look at the anthropology case study now, and I'm sure the numbers will change again in a couple of days as we get new little bits of information. But what we're trying to do is actually model how much is being spent on 6 subscription journals and 3 open access journals, and to see, okay, like what would a subscription equivalent transition cost in total, and how many libraries would we need in order to be able to do the flip, like what is that threshold? So if you actually have a look, I don't know if the link works in the slides that are available through the conference website, but it should link you directly to the case study, and as I said, thank you. Apparently the links do work. And so I invite you to have a look and to comment, and if you do have some data to share or provide or help us move that forward, then I encourage you to do so. But that's kind of, that will give you an example of how we're modeling that one cooperative. And we also have the case study with Canada, which is a little more clear-cut because of CRKN and how much money they invest in subscribing for Canadian journals for institutions.
Okay, I think people are ready for the coffee break. So join me in thanking the speakers on the panel again.